Pop-up headlights have been with automotive culture for at least 80 years. They've been a staple of creating the human experience to automotive faces. And they're very endearing, especially to the people like me who grew up with them, because it introduced to us the idea that the car was alive. You don't really get the movie Cars. You don't really get, and a lot of people like to throw this polysyllabic word around all the time, you don't get the anthropomorphization of automobiles without pop-up headlights. They're cool, they're a joy to look at, because the car is changing its shape depending on what the environment asks for. And of course, there's mods to these things that allow them to wink. You can make them go halfway up and down. But they went away. Why? Well, as other automotive YouTubers have pointed out, there are three main reasons, but I'm going to bring up a fourth. The first is they're hilariously complex. You have motors, you have linkages, and I'm going to take one of these headlights apart so you can see them in a moment. When these things break, they're not only a safety hazard for you, but everybody else on the road. Now, they began, and lots of people have pointed out, in the 30s with the Accord. That was the first car to have hidden headlights. And it's true that they were airplane landing lights that they put in there. But that was back when the world of car design was not regulated. But then they became regulated. And a rule came out, and if you watch classic Top Gear, they've talked about it. It's a Toyota, so there it goes. AW11s are not like NA Miatas. NA Miatas, the headlights go up and down immediately. I just farted. These ones pause just a little bit in case you didn't mean to put them down right away. Then they'll go down. There's always a delay with Toyotas. It's just the way they made them. If you remember classic Top Gear, they talked about the MGB and how when the US deemed that headlights must be so high off the ground, like here on this Galaxy in '63, although obviously that rule didn't exist in '63, I'm just using this as an example, headlights had to be so far above the pavement. And that didn't matter back in the 60s when cars were big, gigantic boats, particularly in America. But when we moved on to the wedge-shaped cars of the 80s, well, you had a problem. How do you create the beautiful, low, sleek, angled, unsafe, take people's kneecaps out front of the car? Oh, that's another thing. We'll get that to in a moment. How do you keep the headlights at the correct government-mandated height, but still have a low face, a low belt line here in the front? Well, you make them come up. Boom! We're not breaking the law. The headlights are this high off from the pavement. We're following the rules. Then it became so popular that not only sports cars had it, but everyday cars had it as well. Like, take for instance this Acura Integra, a four-door one. That's meant to be just a daily car, but it had pop-up headlights. And of course the Accord had it as well. Now that's all fine, and it was a mark of the 80s, but there's another problem, the winter. Oh, it's fine for California and Florida and the American Southwest, but here in Pennsylvania and the rest of the Northeast, bring this camera in here and look at this. Have you ever had the unfortunate experience of having your car door frozen shut and you gotta pull on it? Well, that's your whole body weight trying to open that door. But what if you got rain and sleet on the front of your daily driver and all these little cracks got filled with ice and you had to drive at night? Well, these things aren't coming up. So maybe you get your hand in there and pull. Well, those windows are glass, and so back then were your headlights. That could also break. But they continued and continued. But you remember when I said that the front of this car would take your kneecaps out? Look where the front of this car is. I'm 5'10". The front of this bumper is right here at my kneecaps. You get hit with this, it's breaking all the tendons. You're in a wheelchair. Modern cars, you roll off of them if you get struck. In fact, I did one time see a guy get hit by a car. I was in DC, and Nick Roman, the other half of RCR, can back this up. We literally watched somebody, it was a case of not looking and not thinking. We saw somebody walk across the street, not looking where they're going, and then we see someone else making a left-hand turn cross traffic and not watching where they're driving. Maybe it was a case of cell phones. But whatever, we saw the person get hit by the car, and literally it was like, and it was a modern front bubbly passenger safety car, it was like someone grabbed a big wrestling mat or a gym mat and just went, picture like, I don't know, an Amazonian woman or some giant picking it up and just going whoop to somebody. It's gonna knock you off your feet, but you're gonna be all right. You're just gonna land on your ass. And he did land on his ass. And then he did a sort of silent scream, realizing he just got hit by a car, and the poor driver knew that their year was f***ed. They just struck a pedestrian. But everybody lived, and I went through the intersection realizing I'm not sticking around for this. I'm gone. It's DC. As the wedge shapes went away, that means the headlights would get higher, and that also meant they'd have to be aimed weird. Well, pedestrian safety was another kibosh for these things. But something else incentivized the manufacturers to do away with a feature that everybody loved. And to do that, we're going to need this Galaxy as an example, and I'm also going to need a screwdriver. Dude, all I have is slotted. Good enough. And off. We're going to take apart this headlight so I can show you what's inside. Now for the retaining ring. Retaining ring. Okay, I'm gonna pull the original headlight out of this 88 MR2. Even though this is a futuristic car from the 1980s that's meant to invoke the idea of what the distant future is going to be, look at these headlights. These are sealed beam headlights. What does that mean? There's no light bulb. The entire headlight is a light bulb. One gigantic glass bulb. If this thing burns out, you replace the entire bulb. And these things are still manufactured. But there's a problem. You're stuck with this size, because this is one of the government mandated sizes that was set forth, I believe, around in the 1950s in the US. It wasn't really the case in Japan, wasn't really the case in the UK, but you know, automotive companies are world markets. So they made Americans happy and stuck to these dedicated sizes. That meant that if you wanted to have freedom, oh, and by the way, over here, these were sealed beams. This is a car from the 60s. Now granted, these are LED replacements. These are Holley Retro Brights. I wholeheartedly recommend them. Yes, Holley gave them to me for free, but if you want the good stuff, that's what you get, because the beam pattern, you can't, even if you had a replaceable bulb in here, you couldn't, and that's why the drop-in LED headlights or the headlight bulbs, they just suck, because the beam pattern from an LED cannot be retrofitted into a reflecting housing or projecting housing that's made to focus light from a single strand of a filament. Just those micro, what's smaller than a millimeter? There has to be something smaller than a millimeter. Metric? All right. Let's say 1/4 of a millimeter difference here represents meters of light dispersion 10, 30, 40 yards down the road. Anyway, my point is that headlight technology had not evolved from the 50s into the 80s. So in order to be artistic, you had to have a mechanical workaround. pop-up headlights and also hidden headlights, the one hidden behind barn doors, also popular in the 70s, were a solution to allow designers to have fun with the design while working around this rigid, unartistic, archaic, big square or circle that they can't change. It was Ford who finally lobbied the US government enough. And by lobby, I'm sure some money changed hands with some senators, didn't it? They wanted their new Taurus to be futuristic and look futuristic. And by then in the 80s, all cars in the UK market, the European market, Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Sweden, Korea, Japan, all of them were using molded plastic headlights. It was the US market that was stuck in the 60s with glass headlights. So finally, when the laws were relaxed and Americans could have molded plastic headlights, the front of our cars changed immediately, and pop-up headlights looked archaic, old, and out of touch, plain old uncool. Now that was in late 80s, early 90s. Of course, some manufacturers stuck around with glass headlights, and pop-up headlights continued to be used in the United States all the way, well, the final car sold in the United States that still had pop-up headlights was as late as 2002 or 2004? The final year of the Corvette C5. The Corvette. How do you get a Corvette? Well, how do you get a house? You have to wait for the old man inside to die. That's how you get a Corvette. So the archaic old Corvette finally, when it went from the C5 to the C6, finally lost its pop-up headlights. And that's with the car having molded plastic headlights. They still, for the love of the game, and I respect them for it, having pop-up headlights. But while I have this off here, let me reiterate, and with the camera getting up close, show you the craziness that's going on inside. And let's have a dive inside the headlight bucket of a pop-up headlight. See down there? That's an electric motor. There's another one over for that headlight as well. Both of these are wear items. Electric motors go bad after a while, being used a whole lot. Look over here to the left. That is a linkage that is also adjustable. That means there are pivot points. That means there's bushings in here, rubbing. And this has to do it for years and years and years. Now granted, this is a classic Toyota and these headlights are working fine. But there's also something else. This headlight exists in its own goon chamber, away from everything else in the vehicle. Now, it's not the case in a front engine car, like my friend Drain's A70 Supra. The headlights live within the engine. These headlights, they had to design a whole interior pocket for the headlights to sit in because this is a mid-engine car. And look over here. The wiring harness couldn't travel through, well, I wouldn't call it a firewall. The wiring harness has to move outside the car, along underneath the quarter panel, across to the fuse box. The fuse box for the frunk has to then travel through the car, inside the car, and to the battery and everything else which exists in the middle of the car. That's a lot of nonsense just to have cool headlights. But then again, that was the love of the game, wasn't it? Complexity for the sake of complexity. What's the statement about fashion? If you want to be fashionable, you have to be a little bit uncomfortable. I think that applies here, doesn't it? So why did the headlights go away? Ooh, there's some other problem with pop-up headlights I forgot to mention. How do you aim these things? How do you aim a headlight if it's constantly in motion? Do you change the technology? Well, no. This is still a spring-mounted headlight bucket, just like that 63 Galaxy right next to you. There is no keeping these headlights aimed properly. Also, you have to remember that you're putting the headlights back up correctly and not upside down, which would make your low beam your high beam and your high beam your low beam. You have to accept, now be real gentle, Brian, you're using an impact there. There you go. You have to accept that your headlights are going to become unaligned at some point through no fault of your own, just the natural jittering and jostling as you drive. And it's not just the bumps in the road that can cause your headlight to become unaligned. It's wind resistance. Now, your car is obviously very aerodynamic when your headlights are off, because then they're retracted, aren't they? As I tighten these headlights in, I can hear the little alignment spring moving. As I put tension on the headlight retaining ring, and as the screws suck them up against the bucket, I can hear them moving a little bit. That means I know the next time I'm going to have to drive at night, I'm going to need a Phillips head screwdriver just permanently in the car so I can realign the vertical tilt of these headlights, as I know that the driver's side one has become unaligned by virtue of me making this little demonstration. By the way, if you want to know, you don't have to take this bucket off to align AW11 headlights. Your alignment screw is right down here, and it can be accessed even when your little decorative plastic cover is still attached. This little tab goes in there, and then it goes in. Cool. Brian, how about you stop using the impact? Just use a regular drill on its gentlest setting as you drill into plastic. How about that? There you go. So can manufacturers today bring back pop-up headlights? Well, sure they can. They can if they want to. Will they? I certainly hope so. There's nothing stopping them from putting any sort of articulated device on the front of a car. But will customers these days pay the extra money for the engineering and the extra parts necessary? Will customers take the extra time to familiarize themselves where the motor overrides are? In the case of the AW11, they're right here. It says turn clockwise.
I think you might need to push these in.
Oh!
There you go.
That ain't no hat rack. There it comes. You're making my point. I didn't figure out that there was a dust cap on the headlight override knob. All I'm really doing, I think, is turning the motor right here. And it's raising the headlight. You know, some people like to drive around this way with them half up, like the car's high or something like that, just like that. But the truth of the matter, that's what you're supposed to do when your electric motors for your headlights break. You're supposed to turn these things. I remember back in the 90s, you would see stuff like the Honda Accord that had the pop-up headlights, and one would always be permanently up, or you'd see them with both headlights up, because the cost of reduced fuel economy from wind resistance from having your headlights up permanently was nowhere near the cost of paying to replace 2 electric motors. Would enough customers want this particular weird retro fashion statement on their car to justify manufacturers making them again? And by that I mean making a mass-produced car like this MR2. Would they do it again? Well, I don't know. Even the MR2 lost its headlights in the year 2000 in the 3rd generation when they went to just molded plastic. I don't know if they're coming back. Maybe it would take some sort of an eccentric magnate who really wanted to live in 1988 again to make a limited production version of whatever car with pop-up headlights. But would it look the same? Because cars today can't be low and square like this for pedestrian safety laws. Imagine if we just saw a Honda CR-V with just more headlights up top. They would probably have And that's another thing. Since we're going to LED headlights for everything now, headlights can be physically smaller but put out the same amount of light in the same beam pattern. So why would you want big honking eyes to come up like that other than to be cool and weird, or just weird? Enough people would have to be horny for being goofy to justify the cost. Anyway, that's what happened to pop-up headlights. Thank you. See you Monday.